China and East Asia to the Ming Dynasty. Introduction. In 1974, farmers digging a well in a field located in northwest China uncovered fragments of a clay figurine. Little did they know, they had chanced upon what has turned out to be one of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Subsequent excavation revealed that beneath the fragment lay a massive underground pit filled with over 7,000 terracotta figurines modeling archers, infantrymen, and charioteers. Another pit contained terracotta cavalry and infantry units that likely composed a military guard, while a third one contained high-ranking officers and war chariots in what was perhaps a command post. These three pits are part of a much larger complex of underground vaults spread across 22 square miles. Most importantly, a large, forested burial mound towers over the neighboring fields containing these underground armies. This is where the first emperor of Qing was buried after he died in 210 BCE. Although it hasn't yet been excavated, experts believe the tomb is a microcosm of the emperor's palace, capital city, and empire. The pits, then, contained the army protecting his realm in the afterlife. With this discovery, our understanding of how China was unified under one empire after a long period of warfare was advanced immeasurably. East Asia can be defined in two different ways. Geographically speaking, it can be defined as the eastern region of the Asian continent and the countries located there, principally China, North and South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. But historians also define East Asia as a broader cultural realm, and include countries that both shared close historical relations with China and were impacted by China's political and legal institutions, and Confucian and Buddhist traditions. When defined in this way, Vietnam is also included. This chapter, however, as an introduction to the early history of East Asia, will focus on China, Korea, and Japan. Geography of East Asia. China's early historical development long predated Japan's and Korea's, which is why a chapter on East Asian history logically begins in the 2nd millennium BCE with China's first dynasty. However, today's nation of China is much larger than China was in ancient times. In earlier times, the bulk of the Chinese population lived in China proper, by which we mean the historical heartland of ancient China. To the east, China proper is bounded by the Yellow Sea, East China Sea, and South China Sea. To the south, it is bordered by the mountainous jungles of Southeast Asia. To the west and north, China is rimmed by a transitional frontier zone where land suited to agriculture gives way to mountains and plateau, or vast expanses of steppe grasslands and desert. At times, the dynasties of China became actively involved in all of these neighboring areas, incorporating them directly into their expanding empires or indirectly as subordinate, tribute-paying states. Those areas include parts of the Korean Peninsula, northeast China, Mongolia, Central Asia, and Vietnam. Within China proper, two rivers were particularly important to the formation of agricultural communities that served as the building blocks of Chinese civilization. Those were the Yellow River and Yangtze River. The Yellow River meanders through the northern half of China, where a cool, dry climate is well suited to wheat and millet farming. Beginning far to the west, this river meanders over dusty plateau, becomes muddied with silt, and then deposits this sediment along its middle and Lower reaches. The plains surrounding these reaches are collectively referred to as the North China Plain. Historically, this was the heartland of Chinese civilization. However, the Yangtze River was just as important. Located in South China where the weather is relatively warmer and wetter, its long basin provided fertile soil for rice paddy agriculture. Over time, the early dynasties expanded into and included the settled agricultural communities in this region. Japan is an island country consisting of 4 main islands and many smaller ones located off the Pacific coast of the Asian continent. At 400,000 square kilometers, Japan is slightly smaller than California, although the terrain is more rugged. Because Japan is covered by mountains and traversed by numerous rivers, only 15% of the land is suited to agriculture. The countries of East Asia share in the region's temperate climate and summer monsoon season. During the summer months, warm and moist air originating from the Pacific flows from southeast to northwest, while during the winter months cold and dry air originating from Central Asia moves in the opposite direction. Thus, those areas of East Asia located further to the east and south are generally warmer and wetter, and for longer periods of time. That made them well suited to rice paddy agriculture, and rice consequently became the primary cereal crop. In southern China, the Korean peninsula, and the islands of Japan, while growing rice is labor intensive, this grain also offers high yields per unit of land, so it has supported population growth in these countries and, therefore, the formation of vibrant civilizations. China from Neolithic village settlements to the Shang Kingdom. Chapters 2 and 3 covered the development of the first major civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India. In each case, rivers were particularly important to that process because they offered a stable supply of water for agriculture. Similarly, in China, the first major states emerged along China's second longest river, the Yellow River. These states are the Xia Dynasty, circa 1900. 1600 BCE, Shang Dynasty, 1600 to 1046 BCE, and Zhou Dynasty, 1045 to 256 BCE. Each of these kingdoms was ruled by a line of hereditary monarchs hailing from one lineage, which is why they are also referred to as dynasties. Because written sources don't become available until the Shang Dynasty, historians have relied heavily on the archaeological record to reconstruct the process by which these states arose. Looking back at the end of the Paleolithic era, c. 10,000 BCE, East Asia was sparsely populated by bands of foragers living in temporary settlements. During the 8th millennium BCE, in China, some of these hunter-gatherers turned to domesticated cereals for a stable food supply and settled into villages so they could cultivate them. Thus, the Neolithic Age, 8,000 2000 BCE, commenced. Over the course of those 6 millennia leading up to the Xia Dynasty, Neolithic communities became more diverse and complex. For instance, for the period 5000 to 3000 BCE, archaeologists have identified at least 8 major regional Neolithic cultures located along rivers and coasts, see Map 4.2. They did so By examining pottery styles and village settlement patterns. One example is Yangshao culture, which was concentrated along the middle reaches of the Yellow River. Over 1,000 sites left behind by millet farming village communities have been discovered. Jiangzhai, circa 4000 BCE, for instance, was a moated village settlement that occupied roughly 13 acres, see figure 4.2. It was composed of related lineages and tribal in organization. During the 3rd millennium BCE, Yangshao culture was gradually supplanted by Longshan culture, circa 1900 BCE, which emerged further to the east, along the middle and lower reaches of the Yellow River. In 1928, when archaeologists excavated a site near the town after which Longshan was named, they found evidence for a culture that had laid the foundations for the kingdoms that emerged in the 2nd millennium BCE, including the ruins of numerous walled towns with cemeteries outside, see map 4.3. Their rammed earth walls protected urban areas with public buildings, roads, and drainage systems. The cemetery's arrangement suggests that people living in the towns were buried alongside clan members, but also that some members were wealthier and more powerful, while most graves had nothing but a skeleton. Others contained numerous artifacts, such as pottery and jade. Based on this evidence, archaeologists have concluded that, during the 3rd millennium BCE, population grew and some of it shifted from villages to walled towns. These walled towns developed into political and economic centers exercising control over and serving as protection for surrounding communities. Individuals with more elaborate graves were likely political and religious leaders, and served as chieftains. Hence, numerous competing chiefdoms emerged, providing the foundation for more powerful kingdoms to follow. Ancient Chinese histories identify the first major kingdom as the Xia dynasty, circa 1600 BCE. However, these were written many centuries after the kingdom about which they speak, and, lacking written evidence from the dynasty itself, specialists have been unable to definitively establish its location. Nevertheless, most agree that the Xia capital was located along the Yellow River at Arlito, at its peak of activity. From 1600 BCE, this town looks like something more complex than a chiefdom. Arlito included a central walled palace complex, workshops for the production of bronze and pottery, and elite burials containing bronze weapons and jade, suggesting a socially stratified, Bronze Age civilization and kingdom. That is why many historians identify it as the capital of the Xia dynasty. With the Shang dynasty, 1600. 1046 BCE, we formally step into China's historical period. In 1899, in an apothecary, a Chinese scholar came across mysterious bones that were being ground up for use as medicine. He immediately recognized that the Chinese characters inscribed on them were very ancient. Subsequently, the origin of these bones was traced to fields in Anyang, China where, beginning in 1928, excavations were carried out, similar to the discovery of the Indus Valley civilization. A lost civilization was revealed on the North China Plain, the one difference being that traditional histories of a later time had documented this one. See Map 4.4. The findings were substantial. A diverse array of settlements with a royal capital at the center covered nearly 30 square kilometers, see map. 4.5, archaeologists have identified 53 pounded earth foundations as the floors of royal palace temples and the ruins in their vicinity as residential areas for elites and commoners, sacrificial pits, and workshops for the production of bronze, pottery, and stone. Also, a royal cemetery with 8 large tombs and dozens of smaller ones lies to the northwest. The larger graves were roughly half the size of a football field, each accessible through 4 ramps whose orientation to the cardinal directions gives them the appearance of crosses. Deep down, at the bottom of each tomb central shaft, wooden chambers were built to house the dead bodies of Shang kings. Shockingly to us, dozens of human skeletons were placed above and below these, presumably as servants to accompany rulers in the afterlife. View reconstruction of a Xia Dynasty palace at Erlitou. Anyang, we now know, served as the last capital of the Shang Dynasty, from 1200 to 1046 BCE. It was at the center of a loosely governed territorial state located on the North China Plain. Shang kings directly governed the capital and its vicinity, but likely controlled areas farther out by building confederations with locally powerful lineage chieftains, and regularly hunting, warring, and carrying out rituals with them. Some of those leaders were directly related to the Shang kings, and some were allies by marriage. The bones are the most important source for understanding this kingdom. Most of the 200,000 fragments found so far are either turtle plastrons or scapula from cows. Interestingly, these were used for divination, which is why they are called oracle bones. When Shang kings or his diviners sought to know the future, they would proceed to a temple erected in honor of a Shang deity or the spirits of deceased ancestors in the royal line. Before a stone tablet, they would make a statement about what might happen, for example, it will rain, or if we attack the Mafang, High God D will confer assistance on us, and then apply heat to a hole bored into a bone until it cracked. The crack was viewed as the response from the god or spirit. The king would then determine whether or not it was auspicious, and a record would be inscribed on the bone, sometimes including the actual outcome, see figure 4.6. From these, we know that Shang elites believe that a high god D, nature gods, and the spirits of deceased kings controlled the future. That is why Shang kings had massive bronzes cast and carried out sacrifices for them. The bronzes were filled with food and placed at the temples, literally to feed the spirits. Likewise, the sacrificial pits show that a substantial shedding of blood for these higher powers was a regular occurrence. Shang elites worshipped their ancestors and frequently divined to determine their will.